So today we will be discussing about the GSLV Mark III program. But before we start, let's have a brief outline on why we need to have an active GSLV program and how this program has evolved over the years. GSLV program, the need for GSLV program stems from the fact that India today is making rapid strides into the digital era. In fact, this is evident from the fact that government is attaching a very vital importance for Digital India program, and also we are giving an increased thrust. We are giving an increased thrust to digital economy, a cashless economy. But the most important fact here is that we need to have a high-speed internet that is beamed across the country. This cannot be achieved just by means of land-based towers. There is a limit for that. And here what we need to have is satellites, these communication satellites. In fact, what happens is that these communication satellites with their dedicated transponders will be able to beam these high-speed internet across the space, across the mainland. So apart from this, communication satellites also have several other functions also, which are very critical in fact. One is telecommunications, as I said earlier. The second one, broadcasting. Third one, meteorology. Fourth one, disaster warning. Fifth, search and rescue operations. These are a few of the most critical ones. So what happens is that today India is developing at a faster pace. So the demand for all these services is also increasing. But for that we need to have more transponders that are integrated into these satellites. But integrating these transponders makes the satellite heavier. So we need to have satellites, or the upcoming satellites which India will be launching will be of course weighing more tons. That is more than nearly 3 tons or 4 tons. So what happens is that the current GSLV Mark II program will not be able to carry these satellites to the space. And it is here that GSLV Mark III attaches the importance. So today these satellites are becoming more heavier, and need for more and more transponders is also increasing. So as I said earlier, when these transponders are getting integrated into these satellites, it gets bulkier. So the recent one that has been launched by ISRO, that is GSAT-19, actually has a new technology embedded upon it. It is actually called as GRASP. Using this technology, ISRO will be able to have or increase the effective data rate that ordinary GSATs have. Ordinary GSATs have an effective data rate, that is a data rate transfer of 1 gigabytes per second. But using this technology, the new satellites, that is GSAT-19 to start with, will be having an effective data rate of 4 gigabytes per second, which means that we will be able to save up to 4 launches. That is, it can be used to replace 4 satellites. The next one, that is GSAT-11, which will be soon launched, has an effective data rate transfer of 14 gigabytes per second. And the GSAT-20, which will be launched in the next late 2018, will be having an effective data rate transfer of 70 gigabytes per second. So the problem with this is that the satellites are actually becoming more and more bulkier due to these technologies. And hence, in order to carry these communication satellites, we need to have an active GSLV Mark III program or higher versions. So moving on to the evolution part, you can see that GSLV Mark III is actually the 4th generation launch vehicle that India has made. It is in fact the largest and most heaviest of the launch vehicles that currently India has. Coming to the GSLV evolution, you can see that towards the late 1980s, ISRO was about to seal a deal with Soviet Space Agency to have a know-how or to have a technology transfer on the critical cryogenic engine stage. But what happens is that at that time, US through MTCR regime imposed certain sanctions on India. So it also became applicable to ISRO, the country's only space agency, due to which Russia or Soviet Union was unable to transfer this technology, and hence ISRO had to settle with a technology, but again it was of much lesser intensity, through which certain number of cryogenic engines were transferred, but the technology transfer was not happening. So if you observe the early launches that was initiated in 2001 when we had our first GSLV launch, it was using a GSLV Mark I engine. GSLV Mark 1 engine actually carries the Soviet era or the Soviet made engines itself. Following that, there were other six launches also. But again, in 2010, we tested our own indigenous Mark II engine, but which again was a failure. So if you observe the success rate that GSLV program had initially, that is from 2001 to 2010, you can see that the success rate is very low. In fact, it is just 1 in 3 launches that had success. So this was major stumble block, or this was a major hurdle that ISRO had towards mastering GSLV program, or the cryo stage, in fact, the most important one, the cryogenic stage. So GSLV Mark II, which was indigenously developed, and the first launch was in 2010, as I said earlier, that was a failure. After that, what happened is that GSLV, the program was reinitiated or restructured, and ISRO came up with a new engine, that is Mk2, indigenously developed. But it is known as CE 7.5. It had a capacity up to carrying capacity of up to 2 tons. But again, you can trace its origin back to the Soviet era supplied engines. But that was also a tricky one. That is, it was not that much reliable. It was upon this understanding this fact, that is, these engines had some technologies which ISRO didn't have that mastery, while Soviet engineers had that mastery. ISRO decided to start from the scratch for making the GSLV Mark III engine. It is from the scratch itself they started. It is known as CE20, which we will be discussing later. And it is based upon this engine, the cryogenic engine 20, that ISRO's today Mark III program is all about. Okay. Now moving on to GSLV Mark III program. GSLV Mark III is essentially a 3-stage vehicle that has been developed by ISRO. The first stage is all about 2 solid strap-ons. These are the 2 solid strap-ons, and the second one is a core liquid booster. This is the core liquid booster, and the cryogenic upper stage. This is the cryogenic upper stage. In fact, these are the 3 stages that comprises of GSLV Mark III, and it is designed to carry a payload capacity of 4 tons to geosynchronous transfer orbit, or 10 tons, up to 10 tons to low Earth orbit. So moving on to the working aspect, how does it work? This is not important from your mains aspect, but again, for your brief understanding, I'm just giving you an outline. 2 strap-on motors, which I showed earlier, also known as S200, is filled using solid propellant. And when this is ignited, the launch vehicle lifts off. The second stage is the L110 stage. It is the core stage. It's the most important stage, the core stage, which is also known as, which is powered by 2 Vigas engines. It is also called as powerhouse of the vehicle because it is this stage that guides the vehicle through the atmospheric phase, the most trickiest part. The third one is the cryo stage, the cryogenic stage. It is known as C25, and it is powered by CE20, combustion engine, cryogenic engine 20, which India had mastered, which I said earlier. And it is India's largest and one of the most powerful cryogenic engines of upper stages in the world. So what is that makes this technology a bit trickier one? The first is that these 2 propellants has to be stored at a ultra cool temperature, that is minus 250 degrees Celsius, in 2 separate storage containers. And the most important part, the next aspect, which is most trickiest, is that you have to place these 2 in close proximity with that of the extremely hot combustion chamber where the combustion occurs. So the 2 aspects is that the 2 propellants have to be liquefied and stored separately at very low temperature of minus 250 degrees Celsius. Technology also requires extremely cold fuel tanks to be placed in close proximity to extremely hot combustion chambers. But at the same time, they do reward us by providing higher thrust to weight ratios, which means that heavier satellites can be launched using this cryogenic upper stage or the cryogenic stage. Unlike CE 7.5, which GSLV Mark II has, GSLV Mark III is having an indigenously developed cryogenic upper stage, which was built from the scratch by the ISRO engineers. Now, after several failures at indigenously made cryogenic engines, the 2 past launches, one is GSLV F05, which was in fact the 10th flight of GSLV and the first operational flight of GSLV that was using the cryogenic upper stage, the indigenously developed cryogenic upper stage. launching INSAT 3DR satellite, and GSLV F09, which was launched recently in this May, paved the way for the later success of GSLV program. So the advantages which these programs are expected to contribute is that we'll be able to save nearly 25% of the cost that is incurred while using the services of foreign agencies. In fact, there was a study saying that within 2005 to 2016, 8 satellites that were launched using French Guiana or foreign space agencies had costed Indian exchequer nearly rupees 4,200 crores. And it is expected that we can reduce that particular amount by at least 25% using this indigenously developed or our own GSLV program. Okay? Now moving on, why is it that GSLV Mark III is more important, is very important as far as India space programs is all concerned on? First and foremost, we'll be able to reduce our dependence on foreign agencies such as French Ariane Space, etc., to launch our own satellites. In fact, for satellites that weigh beyond 2.3 tons, right now we are depending on French Ariane Space, which is a costly matter, as I said earlier. So here we'll be able to reduce our dependence, and the second most important part is that we'll be able to attract foreign customers, just like our PSLV. In fact, the space program is actually a multi-billion-dollar global satellite market, launch market, and here the huge part or the huge chunk of this multi-billion-dollar market is right now captured by Ariane Space as well as SpaceX. This is where our GSLV is going to compete. And also, the most important part is that our PSLV till now has been able to capture just nearly around 0.6% of this entire market. So using GSLV, we can actually go ahead, we can actually increase our market share. It will also enable India to send more manned missions and also undertake several deep space explorations and also interplanetary missions, which will be having more sophisticated instruments than which we had in our previous vehicles such as Chandrayaan as well as Mangalyaan. So these two were not having that much sophisticated instruments mainly because we didn't have that capacity to carry heavy weighted, or our payload was, the carry capacity of our launch vehicles were very much limited. So this is where ISRO will be able to emerge. To sum up, GSLV Mark III program is a much simpler program, a much simpler launch vehicle. So it is expected to be the future workhorse vehicle of ISRO, just like PSLV is right now for ISRO. Now, it is also expected that with this program, we will be able to achieve our goal of being self-reliant in country's space program. Okay? Now, moving on to the analysis part, Mark III actually occupies a vital role in ISRO's future programs, as far as ISRO's future programs are concerned. This is because there are two aspects, that is first and foremost domestic, and the second one international perspective. From the domestic perspective, there are two important points. First one, we'll be able to reduce our dependence on foreign countries to launch our own satellites. This is the most important one. And the second one is that, as I said earlier, we need to have more satellites that are having more and more transponders. And here, we'll be able to increase the number of transponder envelope, that is, increase it beyond 42 transponders per satellite, which means that even if the satellite becomes bulkier, still India itself would be able to carry or ferry the satellites to geosynchronous transfer orbit. So that is one aspect, that is the most important aspect from domestic perspective. Coming from the international perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we can see that major chunk of the multi-billion-dollar space launch market is right now captured by Ariane 5 and Falcon 9. Ariane 5 is that of Ariane Space and Falcon 9 is that of SpaceX. So a bigger part is right now consumed by these two players. It is here that Mark III is going to compete, and in order to be competing, we need to remain competitive in our rates, which is evident from the manner in which PSLV has also been a success, and also display a high success rate like PSLV in its launch. So only when these two aspects are covered, we will be able to come up with a parallel program which is affordable for many of the aspiring space countries or aspiring countries that needs to send their satellites, but they cannot afford to the high rates that is charged by Ariane Space as well as SpaceX. Now, Indian astronomy community is also going to be benefited because over the years the community has been asking for a space observation. Recently we had launched our AstroSat, but again right now there is a demand from various quarters saying that they need a successful AstroSat which is more powerful, which means that it will be more bulkier. So for launching all these, that is for launching our space observatories, more sophisticated space observatories, as well as interplanetary missions to Mars, Chandrayaan 2, Mars Orbital Mission 2, and also deep space missions like what NASA has carried out over the years, we need more important, or we need to have a credible GSLV Mark III program. So the next one, that is having manned missions, are also important from a longer vision, longer perspective, and here we need to have this manned missions completed before we start our Indian space station program. And also to carry, that is in order to carry several cargos to our space station as well as other space stations also, we need to have a successful GSLV Mark III program. So moving on to the suggestions part, what we can say is that recently an international study was conducted on the international communication satellites that was launched between 2005 to 2015. So when they analyzed it, they found that nearly 12%, just 12% of the satellites fall below 2.5 ton category. That is the communication satellites that was launched. Just 12% of them falls below this 2.5 ton category. In fact, nearly 30% falls between 2.5 to 4.2 tons, and 27% falls between 4.2 to 5.4 tons. Which means that, and the other one, that is 31% in the very heavy 5.4 ton plus category. What India's PSLV has is something which caters to the less than 2.5 ton. But again, PSLV is not, or is seldom used for launching our communication satellites. It's not that much common. So India, if it has to compete in the global market, it will have to get in this 30%, 27% and 31% area. That is, it is this area that India has to compete. So the suggestions which we can give in this respect is that we have to close GSLV Mark II because the payload capacity which Mark II has is essentially below this 2.5 ton, which just 12% is having. So we need to close GSLV Mark II program as soon as GSLV Mark III enters into operational phase. Along with that, we can also increase the Mark III's production capacity by involving Indian industries in such a manner that more and more launches can be taken place at a very short period. The growth options for GSLV Mark III must also be exercised. That is, we need to increase the carry capacity, payload carry capacity. In fact, right now, if it is up to 4 tons, we need to increase it to 6 tons, 8 tons, or 10 tons. So the growth options must also be exercised on a priority basis. The next is what right now ISRO is doing also. That is, it is trying to substitute chemical propulsions with that of electric propulsions. The recently launched GSAT-9, that is a South Asia satellite, and GSAT-19 also has this electric propulsion system. The advantages that electric propulsion system has over the chemical propulsion system is that, firstly, it will be able to reduce the payload or the weightage of the satellites. That is, it will be able to do away with the chemical propellants that is stored inside these satellites. Second one, it also increases the life of these satellites. International partnership programs and also missions needs to be taken on a priority basis because we need to have more active collaborations with NASA, ESA, Russia, Japan, and even China also. Even in the latest Chinese white paper which they have come up, they also say, they also mention of having more collaborated missions with India. So this also needs to be taken up. Now, the most important one, the next one, is becoming more of market driven rather than becoming state driven. So what happens is that ISRO is not coming up with missions or competitive launch vehicles that can cater to the needs of the markets. Rather than that, ISRO is coming up with those that is in sync with that of the state. So this needs to be changed, and we need to have a market oriented launch vehicle or research and development. So coming across the criticisms, there have been several criticisms across the country, that is across the scientific community, in fact from the industrial level as well as that of across the academic level, saying that the weight to carrying capacity of GSLV Mark III is very much low when you compare with that of the other agencies such as Ariane Space and Russia's ESAs, etc. So for India, GSLV Mark III is a launch vehicle. Its weightage is 640 tons and the carrying capacity is just 4 tons. However, when you compare with that of other nations like that of Japan, its launch vehicle is HIIB. It has a weightage of total weightage of 531 tons, but the carrying capacity is in fact double of that of GSLV Mark III, that is 8 tons. Russia with its Soyuz launch vehicle has a weightage of 312 tons, but at the same time can carry 3.2 tons. USA with that of the Falcon weighs 549 tons and can carry 8.3 tons. Russia with its launch vehicle known as Proton that has a weightage of 693 tons can carry up to 6.3 tons. China with its launch vehicle known as Long March, it has a total weightage of 879 tons, but at the same time it can carry up to 14 tons. It is 14 tons. European Space Agency's Ariane Space launch vehicle has a weightage of 777 tons, but at the same time has a carrying capacity of 10.9 tons. So when you compare across the other nations launch vehicle, you can see that GSLV Mark III has a very reduced weightage to carrying capacity. So this has been the main criticism across by the experts. So when you compare that, the ISRO, after detailed analysis, ISRO came up with the explanation saying that these agencies have their primary of the first stage comprising of either semi-cryogenic or cryogenic engine, while that of India's GSLV Mark III has its primary stage that of solid base fuel. So this primary stage is very much crucial because it helps in the liftoff as well as helping the launch vehicle to escape that of the gravitational force of Earth. So while using a cryogenic engine, you can not only reduce the weightage, but at the same time you can carry better capacity, or better carrying capacity is guaranteed by cryogenic engine or semi-cryogenic engine. But the advantage that solid fuels score over this cryogenic engine is at the cost effectiveness. The cost that is incurred by using these solid base fuel is very low. Is very low when you compare with that of the cryogenic engine. So that is one aspect what ISRO says, but keep this in mind. There is also criticism against ISRO's belief that in future the weightage of these satellites will also be reducing, because in future the satellites will be using electric propulsion system. But this is based upon their argument that the chemical propellants which they are going to use, they are using currently, will be replaced using electric propulsion. And in fact, chemical propellants right now constitutes nearly 55 to 60% of the total weightage of the satellite. So this is something that has been contested by ISRO. But the experts strongly believe that in future the availability of orbital slots in the geosynchronous satellite or geosynchronous orbits is going to be limited, because more and more countries are joining this race. And in future, this might be the scenario in which nearly 4 to 5 or even 10 satellites needs to be integrated into one satellite. That is, the functions that is performed by 10 satellites has to be done by single satellite. This naturally means that the satellite would be becoming more and more bulkier, which is not possible, or which overshoots the carrying capacity of GSLV Mark III. This is evident from the fact that the GSAT-11, which we are going to launch, is right now has a weightage of 5.2 tons, which is well beyond the capacity of GSLV Mark III. And GSAT-20, which I said earlier, has an effective data rate transfer of 70 gigabytes per second, will be much heavier. So this itself contradicts what ISRO believes. So this is an area that all the experts have been focusing upon. That is, we need to reduce it. ISRO, on the other hand, says that you can reduce the weightage of these satellites by changing or by switching over to composites in fabricating the body of these satellites. In fact, Japan uses composite materials for fabrication, and hence their satellites are much lighter when you compare with that of Indian satellites. So this is an area where ISRO is going to endeavor into. The other aspect is that the cryogenic engine, the parts of the cryogenic engines which right now India uses is much heavier. When you compare with that of the other nations, they are using much lighter materials like aluminum. And in future, ISRO is also trying to switch over to such lighter weight metals in order for their launch vehicles to become more and more lighter, in fact. On the whole, the expert community, what they feel is that the government, our Indian government, while giving sanctions or while giving approval for these for the programs, the research and development programs which ISRO puts forward, needs to put into consideration all these strategic values. In fact, you can learn from that of the Chinese government. That is, the Chinese government, when they gave approval for Long March 5 in mid 2000s, they wanted these rockets or these launch vehicles to have a capacity of 14 tons. And right now, this is one of the most successful satellite launch vehicles which currently world has across the countries. So this is an area where the expert community feels that the government has to make its decision. That is, has to make its decision with a long-term implication or the long-term perspective in its goal, in its mind. Keeping all these criticisms in mind, ISRO is coming up with several other launches. In fact, futuristic technologies are being embedded. The first and foremost is replacing the liquid core engine with that of the semi-cryogenic engine, thereby which ISRO can increase the carrying capacity of GSLV Mark III. It is expected to increase it to 6 tons. The prototype of the semi-cryogenic engine will be rolled out on 2019, and with the first official debut of this semi-cryogenic engine on 2021. Thereby, ISRO is aiming towards increasing these launch capacities to that of 10 tons gradually, and then later to 15 tons to GTO. So this is one aspect which right now ISRO is focusing upon. But again, along with that, it is also trying to validate a string of technologies which is very much important for having a human space flight. And having a human space flight is very much important for having a full-fledged space station program. So this is an aspect, this is an area where ISRO is trying to increase its presence. So in the even though right now we have, ISRO has categorically stated that having manned missions is not in priority, in future it is the final goal, or it is actually the long-term goal which ISRO is aspiring for, a long-term space station, in fact. But the key priority as far as India is concerned is to meet, or the space station, agency is concerned, is to meet the national demand by providing more number of satellites, so that it can help in meeting the demands of communication, remote sensing, and navigation. So this is an aspect which ISRO is trying to increase or trying to meet by increasing the launch capacities both in lower and in the GTO or geosynchronous orbit. But the key priority as far as the space agency is concerned is towards meeting the national demand of providing more and more satellites to meet the demands of the growing demands of telecommunication, the growing demands of remote sensing as well as navigations. And for that, right now ISRO is striving towards increasing the number of launches as well as to make it more cost effective. And that is one of the major area where ISRO is currently focused upon. So that's it all about GSLV Mark III. Any questions?